Good evening, everyone. It's 7 o'clock and welcome to the Newburyport Zoning Board of Appeals meeting for October 26, 2021 via Zoom. My name's Mark Moore. I'm the Vice Chair calling the meeting to order as our Chairman, Rob Chimpetti, can't be here tonight. As always, we have our City Planning Director, Andy Port, and City Planner, Caitlin Sullivan, handling the presentations and audience participation. And before we start, we should always recognize our note taker, Gretchen Joy, for her dedicated efforts. I will start with the roll call introduction of the board to verify that we have proper quorum. As I mentioned earlier, I am Mark Moore, Vice Chair, obviously in attendance, with Rob Chimpetti absent. As I introduce each member now, I ask that you please respond with here or present. Secretary Stephen Delisle.
Here.
Excellent. Member Ken Swanton.
Here.
Member Walt Chagnon.
Here.
Associate Member Gregory Bennick.
Here.
Excellent. Finding 5 members present, we have a quorum and can proceed with the meeting. With all members, when not recused, we'll be voting. 3 items of note tonight. First, 65 Curzon Mill Road will be subject to a minimum board as the chair is absent and I will be recused. Secondly, 2224 Olive Street has requested a continuance until our 11/9 meeting. When public hearings begin, I'll chair the continuance issue before handing the gavel to Secretary Stephen Delisle for 65 Curzon Mill Road. With my recusal and the chair's absence, 65 will require a unanimous vote of all 4 voting members for approval. Lastly, a weather comment. We haven't heard enough about weather lately. Given the potential for a power outage in our area as a result of the nor'easter, in the event that the power fails and the meeting is interrupted, to preserve the continuity of the meeting and the notice, we will consider the meeting closed, and in fairness to all, any of tonight's unfinished business will be re-advertised and posted to the city's website calendar with a new date that all can find. Of course, we'll work with the applicants accordingly on the reschedule. For those new to the Zoning Board of Appeals meetings and or new to the Zoom format, we find it helpful to describe how the meeting will flow. With the roll call completed, we'll soon move to public hearings. I'll start by reading a description of the public notice to identify the application to be presented. I'll then ask for the applicant to present the details and salient points of their application and proposed changes. Often it's the applicant's legal counsel or the applicant's architect that will present and describe the proposed changes to the property. Once the presentation is complete, we will then proceed to one of the reasons these meetings are called public hearings. The board will hear public comment. Although still virtual, public comment portion of the hearing entails asking any resident attendee wishing to comment to come forward and be heard. I will ask anyone in virtual attendance who wishes to be heard to raise their hand electronically utilizing the raised hand icon at the bottom of the screen. Andy Port, Caitlin, or I will announce those that are recognized to speak. Please remember to unmute yourself before you start, as I occasionally forget that and it's an awkward silence. As always, before starting to comment, we ask that you clearly provide your name and address for the record. Try to keep your comments succinct and to the point so others who wish to comment can do so efficiently. While commenting, feel free to state questions you may have for the record, but please allow the board to fulfill their role in eliciting additional detail in questions from the board portion of the hearing. Public comments are not intended to be a Q&A between attendees and the applicants. Thank you very much for your understanding. We will proceed with public comment until all raised hands are exhausted and all those who wish to be heard are heard. Once public comments have been heard, that portion of the hearing is closed and we move on to questions from the board. The board, often inspired by public comment and questions, will then ask the applicant or applicant's reps for any additional detail needed in their decision-making process. When the board has exhausted their questioning, I will close that portion of the hearing and move to deliberations. Deliberations in the public forum is another cornerstone to this format. Everything the board discusses about the application is done in public or virtual public, so that all in attendance get to hear the thoughts and discussions of each member and of the board as a whole as it moves towards its collective decision. During that process, it sometimes becomes evident that the board feels it needs more information, or that the board is leaning in opposition for one reason or another. The board may then move to continue the application until it can obtain the desired information from the applicant and give the opportunity to request a continuance. If for some reason the board seems to be leaning negatively, the board likes to give an applicant the opportunity to continue themselves so that they don't face the added cost of going to a formal vote if it's turned down, deal with the timing issues and the cost to reapply. when the deliberations are closed and the board proceeds to a formal vote, I will encourage a motion from the board, and when seconded, we'll call for a vote. Because we use a form of Robert's Rules of Order, you will hear a motion on the application made in the affirmative or to approve, even if a board member making the motion plans to deny. With a minimum number of 4 votes in the affirmative, a motion or application is approved. I will then close the application and move on to the next hearing on the agenda, applying all the same rules. When all applications on the agenda are heard and addressed, I'll close the public hearings portion, and the board will engage in a business meeting to approve the minutes from our last meeting and address any other items appropriate for that forum. Okay, I've called the roll. We have a quorum and we have the weather warning out of the way. Let's get started with the public meeting. The first item that we'll address is the item of 2224 Olive Street. It's application 2021-44 special permit for non-conformities. And there's been a request made by the applicant to continue this to our 11/9 meeting. Does the applicant wish to be heard on this, or should the board just proceed?
The board can proceed. I just would like to inform the board, we're still in front of the Historic Commission, and that's the purpose of the continuance. Thank you.
Got it. Thank you very much. All right, so we have a request to continue to the 11/9 meeting for the 20-24 Olive Street application for special permit. Do we have any discussion or a motion from the board?
Vice Chair, this is Bud Shagnon. I'll make a motion to continue 22-24 Olive Street, docket number 2021-44 to the November 9th meeting.
I'll second it, Ken Swanton.
All right. We have a motion made and seconded, made by Mr. Chagnon, seconded by Mr. Swanton. So we now go to a vote. Mr. Delisle?
Yes.
Mr. Swanton?
Yes.
Mr. Chagnon?
Yes.
Mr. Bennett?
Yes.
I am also a yes. That's all in the affirmative. So this matter is continued to our 11/9 meeting. So now we will go back to the beginning of the agenda and we'll address 65 Curzon Mill Road, an application that I'll be recusing myself from, but it is application 2021-06 for dimensional variance to construct a new 2-story garage and master bedroom, creating a new side yard nonconformity. I am now stepping aside to recuse myself, and Secretary Stephen Delisle will take it from here.
Thank you very much, Mr. Moore. With that, we will reopen the public hearing for 65 Curzon Mill Road, application 2021-06. And I think we have the applicant here tonight, Mr. Brendan Johnson, if you want to take it away.
Yeah, I'm here with my wife, Christina Creel Johnson, as well.
So yesterday, my husband sent a memorandum. I'm just curious, have you guys had the opportunity to review it? And did you receive it? So there it is.
Yeah, I think that we can confirm that it has been received by the board, and it was distributed to the members of the board by the planning office. And I would imagine that everybody took a look at it, but I don't think that I can say that with 100% certainty. But you can continue with your presentation.
So my question is if you had the opportunity to review it or if you did not, because if you did not have the opportunity to review it, would you like to take a minute to review it, or would you like me to walk you through the memorandum?
I think we should, for the purposes of the meeting, we can assume that everyone has reviewed the memorandum, but I think that it would be prudent for the record for you to take us through the memorandum and your argument set forth in the memorandum.
Okay. So our house is built in an unusual angle from the front and rear lot lines and is set back over 40 feet from the yard line. Because of the structure position, and adding a larger garage and additional living space above presents its challenges. We've explored countless alternatives to avoid seeking this variance relief, but complying additions would result in either aesthetically unappealing home, a substantially less functionality, and maybe an additional financial hardship. Let's see. So do you want me to go over what we've looked at? as.
I think you should, excuse me, I'm sorry
Yeah.
to speak over you. Please forgive me for that. But I think you should present whatever material you want the board to hear and present your full argument to the board at this
All right,
time.
so there's 5 things that we could have done in order to not request this variance. One of them means that we could tear down our entire garage as opposed to just adding onto it, as well as the living space above it. And we would make our garage more forward facing as opposed to the way that it is now, which is angled. If we did it more forward facing, we would have to move our driveway more over to the right than what it is now. And not only would we have to tear down our master bedroom, which is our living space above it, and our garage, we would possibly even have to redo part of our kitchen, which is what is attached to the garage, which would be a much more significant cost than just the addition, as well as I don't necessarily know if it would be that aesthetically appealing because our house would still be angled, but now our garage would be forward facing. Another thing that we have looked at is indenting the garage just only on one side by 4 feet, which does not keep up with the aesthetic design of the rest of the house. And it also limits walking space around the vehicle, as well as it limits room from having the vehicle go in and out of the garage. Another thing that we had looked at was that we can attempt to make the addition appear more aesthetically adequate by having the indent of 4 feet on both sides of the garage. In doing so, it would be extremely tight for both cars when both cars are in the garage to be able to walk around, as well as be able to getting the vehicles in and getting the vehicles out. Not only that, the living space above the entire outdoor space, or the entire outdoor wall, I should say, is all dormers. So when we are asking for this addition, we would be taking away the dormers completely. If we indent on both sides by 4 feet, we're leaving 8 linear feet, so 4 linear feet on both sides of basically dead space, as well as the cost for this indent would still be the same exact cost as if we were to do the entire addition that we're requesting for. Another thing that we looked at was possibly moving the garage completely over to the right side. However, if you look at, is there something else that they can look at?
Yeah, if you pull up the other PDF, you can see a picture of the front of the house.
Yeah, so if you look at the PDF, if you look, the right side of our house is also already at that setback of our, so there's just no way that we could add an entire garage on top of that. And the last option would be to basically, to make this all work, would be to tear down our house and to start over from new, which is, way more of a financial burden. So all of these options either provide a much greater financial hardship, a less functionality of space, or a substantially less aesthetic of architectural design and hardship. This is why we are requesting the relief from the 20-foot side yard setback to permit our garage to encroach on the 16 feet 6 inches from the side lot. The reason that we've requested is everything that we had just stated above. Per the rules and regulations of the ZBA, I don't really want to state the entire law. I believe that you guys are familiar with it, but I'll just give you the highlighted version that's in the memorandum, which is with respect to the particular land or structures, a variance from the terms of the applicable zoning ordinance or bylaw where such permit granting authority specifically finds that owning to circumstances relating to the soil conditions, shape, topography of such land or structures, and especially affecting such land or structures, but not affecting generally the zoning district in which it is located. A literal enforcement of the provisions of the ordinance or bylaw would involve substantial hardship, financial or otherwise, to the petition or appellant, and that desirable relief may be granted without substantial detriment to the public good or without nullifying or substantially degrading from the intent or purpose of such ordinance or bylaw. I hope that you find that owning to circumstances relating to the shape of our land and the existing structure, which is the angle of our home that's on the lot at this present time, and especially affecting such land and structure by not affecting generally our zoning district, the siting is unique to the lot and the structure. That literal enforcement of the 20-foot yard setback would involve substantial harm to us, financial or otherwise, which means like we would not be able to require our vehicles to fit into our yard, into our garage. We would not be able to maximize the aesthetic of structure for ourselves and the upstairs space, as well as it would be like an eyesore and it just would not be aesthetically pleasing for us and our neighbors. We cannot provide the aesthetically pleasing and architecturally consistent addition without this modest relief, which is a desirable relief and can be granted without the substantial detriment to the public good or without nullifying or substantially degrading from the intent of the purpose of the bylaw. In fact, several other properties in our neighborhood alone have side yard setback nonconformities. The setback limitations are designed to protect the development with a certain minimum distance. Here, the trade-off for the reasonable zoning relief is both pleased by us, the petitioners, as well as our abutters. The neighborhood would be well served by the approval of this position and the uniquely sited of our home. And the limitations of the lot provided, we have provided ample support of the variance. For these reasons, we respectfully request that the board grant the request of the variance.
Thank you, Ms. Johnson. Thank you very much for your presentation. At this point in the meeting, I would ask for anyone in support or opposition to the application to raise their hand and be called upon to speak.
I'm not seeing one at this time, Chair.
Okay, thank you, Caitlin. I appreciate that. With that, we can close the public hearing and move on to deliberation of the members. And we will begin with Mr. Swanton.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate the presentation. I have a question. If you could put up the page that was marked alternative, showing a little bit of a, yeah, that one. So I'm just trying to understand this page. So you're saying if you were to do this, you would avoid needing a variance. Is that correct?
Correct.
And the numbers are so small here. I just want to make sure I understand it. So the length of this garage, I see a Ford 4-door, 6-foot bed.
Mm-hmm.
And how long is the garage right there? I can't really read the numbers.
I believe it's 29 feet in this scenario.
Thank you. So could you just, I'm sorry, but you may have already addressed this. I think you did on the way by, but could you just repeat that the issue with this particular approach, which would avoid a variance, is what?
The width of the garage gets shrunk pretty significantly.
And the width, once again, I can't see the numbers here, but what is the width of the front of the garage there where the two doors are, the total width?
21 feet.
21 feet. Okay, I just want to understand that because I couldn't quite make out the numbers. My next question has to do with a variance. We do quite a few special permits, but variances are kind of a higher bar for us, and it requires the lot either being an odd shape or being an unusual topology, like a very steep slope, or soil conditions like a lot of wetlands and things. But in going by your house there, it seems like the lot is a square lot or pretty close to rectangular.
Correct.
it seems like it's pretty flat too. It's not like there's a big hill there. And it also seems like there's not a lot of like a little swampland or something. I mean, it seems like it's good land. I just want to, is that correct?
It is. Like the hardship is the position of the home. If our home wasn't at the angle that it was, we wouldn't need this variance. It's because the hardship is the angle of the home, and the hardship is also the financial burden of what it would be to make this like aesthetically pleasing without the variance.
Yeah, I know, I get that. I get why that's a hardship for you to have to kind of start over with your garage, but we who are trying to apply the city's laws here have to look not so much at the building, but at the lot itself, whether it's, an odd shape or an odd topology or, has swamps and things. So I just wanted to verify that. I don't really have any other questions, so thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Swanton. Let's move on to Mr. Shannon.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Delisle. I guess going back to Mr. Swanton's line of questioning, the alternative drawing that was up, it looks like the face of the garage is 21 feet. Is the face of the garage that you're requesting 24 feet? Is there, or 24 and a half? Is there a 3 or 3.5 foot difference between the alternative and what you're requesting?
I have my architect on the line, Steve. I believe he can answer exactly what the numbers are because I don't have the drawing in front of me.
And the reason I'm assuming that is I believe the base case, you're 3.5 feet into the setback, and in the alternate case, you're 0. You're right at the lot line, I assume, of the 20-foot setback.
So
Steve, can I ask the architect? It's actually 4 feet of an inset in that alternate layout.
Okay, so is the garage in the proposed request, is it 25 feet wide then? Because the alternate is 21?
Yeah, that'd be correct.
Okay. I've got no other questions, Mr. Delisle. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Shannon. And I should apologize. I misspoke earlier when I introduced this section. I think I said that this was the deliberation section, and I misspoke. This is the questions from the board. I apologize for that. And with that, we can move on to Mr. Bennett for questions from the board.
Thank you for your presentation. I understand your dilemma, but I don't have any questions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Bennett. And I just have one question. In the, Andy, if you could go to slide number 5. Thank you. In the proposed drawing, is the back wall of the garage the mudroom back wall, or is it that little the narrower wall, which is sort of, I guess, the wall separating the mudroom from the area where the car is stored? Where is the back wall of the actual garage that's proposed to be added to the existing, or I guess the garage exists currently, it's going to be extended. So is the back wall of the garage the back wall of the mudroom?
Yes. The back wall is to where the back of the staircase is on the left side, and the back wall of the mudroom.
Okay. And so the mudroom's like 5.5 feet or 5'8" or something like that.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
Is that the dimension set forth on the proposal? Okay. Okay, thank you. That's it for questions from me. And with that, we can now go to we can close the question section and go to deliberation by the members of the board, and we can start with Mr. Swanton.
My issue with this, as it was many months ago, when this first came up, is that there's really, by my understanding, not a reason that the lot creates a reason for a hardship. The fact that the house was built at whatever angle it was and the garage was built at whatever angle is whatever it is, but we have to look at the lot. And the lot isn't a rectangle, it's flat and it's high and dry. So I have a hard time granting a variance here where we turn down variances in other parts of the city, particularly with a garage that is a very large garage compared to other ones we've looked at in other parts of the city. And where the alternative here is to avoid that little corner there and go to the alternative. But I mean, we can't even really consider that, I think. We need to be thinking about the lot shape, soil conditions, and topography. And I just don't see why this lot stands out as a reason that it has an issue with those things. So I'm reluctant to support a variance for this garage. And that's kind of where I am. But I'd like to hear where my colleagues are on this thing. Maybe I've overlooked something.
Right. Am I allowed to speak? In rebuttal?
This is Mr. Delisle. I don't think that we can take comment right now. Let's go through the deliberation of the members of the board, and then we can consider, further discussion. But I'd like to move along to Mr. Shannon now.
Thank you, Mr. Delisle. I guess just for discussion, since we're deliberating, when we look at section 10 under variances, which was in the memorandum, there's a clause in there, I guess, maybe as a group we ought to just consider. I don't think we've considered it in the past, but maybe it's appropriate here. It says, circumstances relating to soil conditions, shape or topography of such land or structures, and especially affecting such land or structures, but not affecting generally the zoning district. So it seems as though they call into play structure, which I assume the garage and the house is. And it is kind of a queer angle that it's at, causing this hardship for this family. Is that something we should be looking at? I mean, is one of the hardships the fact that this building was built at this strange angle, so that adding to it at all, requires a variance? I'm just bringing it up for the team. For me, that's the only line in the entire variance permit that would come into play here, where if we took that into account, a variance might be appropriate here. That's all I had, Mr. Delisle.
Thank you very much, Mr. Shannon. Let's move along to Mr. Bennett, please.
Yeah, I think I agree with Mr. Shagnan's reading of the zoning ordinance. I think it is appropriate to consider the structure itself. However, as we know, the discretion that we have here in granting a variance is quite circumscribed. And I take the point that we can look at the structure itself. However, I have two major hurdles that I find myself having a hard time clearing. And first, I have a hard time reaching a conclusion that the current situation and structure involves a quote substantial hardship to this applicant. And I understand what the hardship is. I know that the term substantial hardship has some subjectivity to it. However, in my view, I think we are talking about more than adding to an existing two-car garage, which I believe can house, certainly can house cars. And it was structured for that very purpose. Secondly, we must find that the current situation here deprives the applicant of reasonable use of the structure, and that certainly is not the case here. The Johnsons can certainly use this property reasonably and in fact very comfortably. So I'm having a difficult time reaching the rigorous conclusions that we must reach to grant a variance as contrasted to a special permit for non-conformities, for example. So that's kind of my observations on this. And I'm not saying anything about the character and the quality of the application itself, but I find ourselves quite circumscribed here in making these very rigorous findings here that we must do in connection with the variance.
Thank you, Mr. Benick. So I would be inclined to agree with Mr. Swanton and Mr. Benick here that this is a tall finding that we have to make in order to overcome the hurdle that the law sets forth for the granting of a variance. And my deliberation on this, or my thoughts on this, are that we're not quite there with respect to the facts that we need to consider to grant this variance. So I think that I would have a hard time at this time now, as previously when we discussed this, supporting this variance. So with that, we can end the deliberation section. And I see that Mr. Tedesco has his hand up. Is that a question? Oh, he no longer has his hand up. Okay. So I guess at this point in time, hearing the members of the board deliberate on this application, would the applicant be inclined to withdraw the application, or would the applicant prefer the board go to a vote?
Yes.
I'm just wondering if anyone else in the neighborhood is on this call right now.
Well,
Or do we have to-
Mr. Johnson, I think we went through that portion during the public comment portion, and there was nobody who spoke either for or against at that point in time. So I think we've closed the public hearing on this. And now the question becomes, should we go to a vote, or do you want to withdraw the application?
Sorry, can you guys hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yeah. Yep. Can you give me 1 second?
Yeah, let me just reiterate something that Mr. Moore said earlier, that because we have a minimum board here for you this evening, it would require 4 votes in the affirmative, meaning all 4 members of the board would have to vote in favor of the variance for you to be successful. And if it went to a vote and the vote was not successful, there would be a 2-year prohibition on presenting an application that is not, I think, substantially different from the current application.
And how many board members are there that are not going to be, that are not here tonight that could potentially vote?
Well, there would be one additional board member, so you would have 5 board members on another night, but we've heard from the board members during this deliberative process, and it appears that there are 3 which do not seem inclined to vote in favor of the application. So under any count, you need 4, whether it's 4 of 5 or 4 of 4.
We would like a continuance.
Okay, so do I hear a motion from the board for a continuance of this matter?
Mr. Delisle, I will move that we grant a continuance for application 2021-06, but circumscribe that continuance with the admonition and directive and order from the zoning board that this continuance is the last continuance for this application.
I'll second that, Ken Swanton.
Okay, we have a motion made by Mr. Bennett and seconded by Mr. Swanton. So I'll go to the roll. Mr. Swanton,
Yes.
Mr. Chagnon,
Yes.
Mr. Bennett,
Yes.
and I, Stephen Delisle, vote yes. That's 4 in favor of a continuance of application 2021-06 for 65 Curzon Mill Road.
Chair Delisle, this is Caitlin. Just thinking we need a date and time certain, and I suggest the 11/23 meeting. The 11/9 meeting is very full.
Okay, Caitlin, thank you. So we will, should we revote that then? With
Yes,
the
please.
continuance to 11/23? Did you say yes,
Yes,
please?
thank you. Yes.
Okay,
Does that
Okay.
date work for the applicant?
Mr. Johnson, is the November 23rd good for you?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So we will now, we'll revote this. Mr. Swanton,
Yes.
Mr. Chagnon,
Yes.
Mr. Bennett,
Yes.
and I vote yes. So that's 4 in the affirmative. And with that, 65 Curzon Mill Road is completed, and we will bring back Mr. Moore and hand him the virtual gavel.
Broke my own rule and didn't unmute myself. Thank you, Mr. Delisle. Next on the agenda is our application for 30 Winter Street, 2021-49 special permit for nonconformities. Remove an existing rear shed roof line, extend upward the second floor walls and roof to create greater headroom. This is continued from our September 28th meeting. And I believe the applicant, Eric Premack, will be presenting. And might we hear from the applicant?
Yes, good evening.
Good evening.
So had brought this forward to ZBA back in September, and we tabled it until I could get a decision from historical, which I did last week at their meeting after a few changes to the plan. Most specifically was the reduction of the rear section to leave the rear gable exposed. That was one of the biggest issues that historical had. If you guys want to, I'm not sure if you remember this project, if you want to review it again, we have the front section, which is going to remain intact and the same view, and all the existing window openings replaced with like windows, simulated divided light windows that are going to be from Harvey with black exterior. And if you go down the presentation and look at the, so there's the rear section. So the rear section, as you said, we lowered that so that you could, so that the full gable on the left side would stay exposed. And what we're going to do is tear off that back section and rebuild it so that we don't have any issues with structural questions as well, which historical had some questions about. If you go back, you see it has a sloped roof now. And so we're going to tear that back section off, rebuild it so that it has a somewhat flat roof, not totally flat. It's going to be a little pitched from the right side of that gable onto a flat like section on that back end. Again, going to be replacing all the windows in the house with the same 6/6, 9/6, 12/12, 12/8, keeping all the existing doors, keeping all the existing trim, replacing and repairing where necessary. The same exact footprint of the house, not, this is basically an extension of existing non-conformities because on both sides of the house is only about 3 feet between neighbors. That's pretty much it. If there's any questions as far as what we're doing of the structure, please feel free to ask.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Premark. With the presentation done, we will now look for a public comment. I don't know if anyone's participating that wishes to comment on this application, but at this point, it's a good time to electronically raise your hand and be heard.
All right, we have Mr. Thomas Coulter-John.
Hello, can you hear me?
We can go right ahead.
Thank you very much. Tom Coulter-John, 64 Federal Street, co-president of the Newburyport Preservation Trust. I would like to simply draw attention to 2 brief items this evening. This wonderful historic building is certainly in need of restoration, and I am glad it will finally be getting some attention. Mr. Premak's memo dated 10/19/21, he states his intentions to basically restore this building. In number 7 specifically, the existing side doors will remain, all existing clapboard will be kept, repaired, or replaced with badly deteriorated, all wood trim, window and door surrounds, corner boards, etc. shall be restored, repaired, or replaced in kind to match existing design and materials. I only point this out because we have seen in the past developers who go way beyond this. I just want to highlight that the intention here is restoration, not replacement. The second item is a concern, or perhaps it's simply a question on the windows. Windows went back and forth many times during the Historic Commission hearings. My understanding is that the intention is vinyl windows. I can't tell from the spec sheet submitted. If it is vinyl, I think it's a shame and that the building deserves better windows. Our landfills are overflowing with poor quality windows. My wife and I have seen a neighboring house whose windows have been changed 3 times so far while we have lived here. They're about to get a 4th set of windows because most of them were vinyl and poor quality. Thank you very much for your consideration. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Coulter-John. Is there anyone else that would like to comment?
Not seeing any at this time, Chair.
Okay, thank you, Caitlin. All right, so with no further hands raised, the public comment portion of the meeting is closed, and we'll move to questions from the board, and we'll start with Mr. Delisle.
Thank you, Mr. Moore. Mr. Primax, how are you? Good evening.
Good evening.
Just to pick up on Mr. Coulter-John's comments and what happened at the historical committee with respect to the windows, if you could just sort of let us know what the verdict is on the windows.
Well, we did go back and forth a few times on the windows. They did want me to use wood windows. I had a well-known woman over in Amesbury, the window woman. I'm not sure if you guys are familiar with her. She came and assessed the windows, and it turned out that none of the windows in the house were original, but they had been replaced probably in sometimes her best guess was like mid-90s. And unfortunately, they were replaced by good windows, but nobody ever took care of them. And everything was pretty much rotted. So she had given me a quote as far as what to do, what it would cost to replace, again, all of these fine window openings with wood windows. And then storms, you would have to add storms. And the price was not only extremely prohibitive, but the fact is I already, and I know it has nothing to do with what you guys seek, but I already have a buyer for this house who is putting me in charge of restoring this house. And she wants vinyl windows. I'm not replacing them with cheap windows by any stretch. They're not going to be as much as wood, but for ease of use and cleaning, etc. As far as energy efficiency goes, she prefers vinyl. The board, we went back and forth a little bit, and I presented the board with the spec sheet of what I was going to use, and they agreed. It was part of the agreement with historical last time that they accepted the windows that I was going to use. They just wanted me to give in another spec as to the exact window I would use, and I passed that in yesterday. Which is a Harvey window, Harvey vinyl. It's black clad on the outside and white on the inside.
And that's the spec that we received that Andy has on the screen now.
Correct.
Okay. And
so obviously that's just a sample of one of them, but those will be the windows that we use.
Okay. And one thing that we talked about when we had the prior meeting was whether are they the mullions, the parts that make up the window grate?
Yeah, so we've got the 3D, so we got the grates on the exterior, on the outside, as well as the space, spacer bars on the inside.
Got it. Okay. And then with regard to the back gable, I believe I remember that as being one of the issues that we talked about. So that now has been resolved to the satisfaction of historical as well.
Correct.
Okay. That's it for questions for me. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Mr. Delisle. Mr. Swanton?
Mr. Delisle asked several of mine, but I have one more, which is around the memo that we got. I think also Mr. Coltajohn referenced. If you could, Andy, or Caitlin, put the little note up there. I guess on point 4, if we zoom in on point 4, it says that the last line there in point 4, the door opening should remain the same, and all trim, window and door surrounds, corner boards is to be repaired or replaced in kind to match the existing. We have run into situations in other projects recently where people have been quite liberal in interpreting this sentence, repaired or replaced in kind. Mr. Primack, could you comment upon what you have in mind there?
We have nothing but wood in mind. All the trim that's, if anything's rotted, it's going to be removed and replaced with the same kind of trim in wood. We're not looking to do PVC. The only thing that's going to be exterior on this house that won't be wood will be the vinyl windows.
Okay, I noticed you mentioned in the plan that you're looking at red cedar for the clapboards.
Correct.
So like even on, I didn't look closely at your window surrounds, but you'd be matching moldings and all that kind of stuff if you find some that are rotten and need to be replaced.
Correct. Which is just about all of them.
So you'd be building new wood moldings matching what's there from the 1700s. Okay, just checking. You know, we've had other projects in town where people have wanted to do things with upward extensions, but yours is on the back. And you now do have the support of the Historic Commission. So I think I have no additional questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Swan. Mr. Chapman?
I've got no additional questions, Mr. Moore. Thank you.
Excellent. Mr. Bennett?
No questions here.
Thank you very much. And I will echo that as well. I think all the questions that needed to be asked were asked. So with that, I will close the questions from the board portion of the hearing and move on to deliberations and go swing it around to Mr. Delisle. And remember, excuse me, Mr. Delisle, before we discuss this, we should remember it's a special permit for nonconformity. So our discussions should revolve around the findings that we need to make in granting a special permit. And with that,
Thank you.
I'll turn it over.
Thank you, Mr. Moore. In looking at the criteria for the special permit for nonconformities, clearly here there will be no addition of a new nonconformity. And with regard to the scope of the application, I don't really believe that there'll be any it will create a situation that is substantially more detrimental to the neighborhood than what currently exists. I think that, you know, having this fully vetted by the Historical Commission and the back and forth between Mr. Premack and Historical yielded a better plan here. And I think this is something that I can support.
Thank you, Mr. Delisle. Mr. Swanton?
Yeah, I think Mr. Delisle once again hit many of my key points. I think I would like to add, you know, in a perfect world, I would like to, it's unfortunate you moved away and moved to vinyl, but you do at least have grates on the outside. And the other thing I wanted to emphasize is that I have objected recently to projects where people wanted to do a major upward extension, but in other cases, they were on the main building right on a street and with immediate abutters objecting. In this case, this is on the back. It's not on the major building, it's on the L. And I haven't heard anything from an immediate abutter objecting. So I can support this application.
Thank you, Mr. Swanton. Mr. Chapman?
Thank you, Mr. Moore. I agree with the comments made by Mr. Delisle, and I can support the application. Thank you.
Excellent. And Mr. Bennett?
I will echo those remarks. This is a property that is in bad need of rehabilitation and restoration. I appreciate, Mr. Premack, your undertaking that. And I further am pleased with the way that you worked with the Historic Commission here to arrive at what they perceive as an acceptable project, and what I do as well.
Thank you, Mr. Bennett. And for all the reasons stated by my colleagues, they said it best. And for those reasons, I certainly do I can find myself in support of this. The renovation is going to be a real plus for the city. So with that, I close deliberations, and then we'll look for a motion.
Greg Bennett, I will make a motion that the application for special permit for nonconformities for 30 Winter Street, application number 2021-49, be approved.
I'll second that, Mr. Delisle.
Okay, we have a motion to approve made by Mr. Bennett, seconded by Mr. Delisle. We'll now go to a vote. Mr. Delisle?
Yes.
Mr. Swanton?
Yes.
Mr. Chagnon?
Yes.
Mr. Bennett?
Yes.
I am yes as well. All in the affirmative. This application is approved.
Thank you very much, gentlemen.
Thank you. And good luck.
Appreciate it.
We now move on to our next application this evening, and that's for 64 Liberty Street. 2021-52 special permit for nonconformities. Remove an existing one-story addition on a non-conforming single-family structure and replace it with a new addition. The application is Eve Davis Lee, care of Lisa Mead, Tellerman Costa. And at this point, this was continued from 9/28. And at this point, might we hear from the applicant?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Lisa Mead, Tellerman Costa, 30 Green Street, for the applicant Eve Lee at 64 Liberty Street. And with me this evening, in addition to Eve, is Julie McDonald of Olson Lewis Architects, who is the architect on the project. If you go to the next page, please. So this property at the corner of Liberty and Federal Street is a current single-family home. It's in the R2 district, and we're proposing to renovate and add on to the single-family home by removing a shed roof addition and replace it with a new addition. As I noted, the property's in the R2 zoning district. The structure was built between 1750 and 1775 and is listed as contributory on the district data sheets. The applicant is removing less than 25% of the exterior walls, and therefore the DCOD does not apply. However, there was a roof line change. That is, we're removing that shed roof addition. And that required us to go to the Historic Commission, where we received approval of the addition which you have before you this evening. The property is non-conforming for area. There's 1,883 square feet, where 10,000 square feet are required. It is 0.2 feet over the rear property line, and the rear property line in this instance, as I'll show you in a minute, is that property line opposite Liberty Street because it's the longest. So it's 2 feet over the rear property line where 25 feet is required. The front setback is 2 feet over where 25 feet is required. And the side setback is 0 where 10 feet is required. That is on the Federal Street side. Further, lot coverage is non-conforming at 53.2%, where 25% is required, and the open space is at 12.3, where a minimum of 40% is required. If you could go to the next slide, please. So the proposal is to remove the existing one-story addition on the northerly end of the structure. And if you're standing at the structure in front of Liberty Street, it's the addition that's on the right-hand side, and replace it with both a single and two-story addition, the two-story being located to the rear of the property and not right on Liberty Street. The deck will also be revised and made slightly smaller, given the modified addition. The rear setback will be extended, although it will be improved because we're actually taking off the encroachment and making it meet the rear, or that come inside the property line, if you will. The new footprint will extend approximately 4.1 feet longer than the addition down Liberty Street, and the rear extension along the rear lot line will extend an additional 8.8 feet along the rear lot line from the current addition. On the north and south, where the current addition extends over the property line, as I implied earlier, that will be brought into the property. One aspect of it will be adjacent to the Liberty Street side, will actually be stepping back 5.55 feet from Liberty Street to the second story addition. So again, the primary front yard setback is extended, the rear yard setback is extended. Lot coverage is increased slightly. Open space is also increased. That's to the better, but that's because we make that rear yard come onto the property. And so we gain some coverage in that regard. So the addition constitutes an upward extension along the rear property line extension as well. Next slide, please. So the upper plan is the existing conditions, and the lower plan is the proposed conditions. So you can see how the addition extends a little bit further down the rear lot line, and down Liberty Street. Next slide, please. So here's the existing conditions, the front elevation. I'm going to run through these, and then I'm going to turn it over to Eve to talk about the details of the addition and how we believe that the new addition actually is very much in keeping, as did the Historic Commission, with the design criteria under the Secretary of the Interior standards. But here's the front elevation along Liberty Street. Next slide, please. And here's our proposed along Liberty Street. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Julie just to talk a little bit about why she designed the proposed addition in this manner.
Hi, good evening. This is Julie McDonald from Olson Lewis Architects. Hope you're all doing well. Thank you. This shows a two-story addition, although what we wanted to do was keep, in addition to pulling the new back from the face of the house, we wanted to really be careful to keep the addition lower and not as important as the original larger part of the house. So what you see at the addition is a one-story piece that's close to Liberty, and then also a one-story piece on the right that's set even further back. The two-story piece is beyond. So we really feel that from the street, it's kind of, it's got a nice scale, kind of approachable low. Where you also see that we're going to be doing cedar shake roof to match the existing. The siding will also match and be continuous, the same exposure widths. We are going to be simplifying the trim. Although it will be painted wood, we wanted to again show a difference between the original main part of the house and this. We thought it was appropriate to simplify a bit. And other than that, real simple details similar to what we have at the original house, as far as where the roof, the eave details, overhang on corner boards. Next slide, please. So this is the existing west elevation. So you see the one-story shed with skylights, kind of a more contemporary piece. And you see the overhangs, how that part of the house projects to the right and left. Those are where we actually stick over the property line. Next slide, please. So here you'll see that the proposed that the front and back, we're pulling the addition in both to have all the new part be within the property line, and also to not conflict with the existing edges of the main house. So here again, you see on left side, you see the one-story piece that's at Liberty Street, and the two-story piece that's set back towards the rear of the property. And we also have the one-story gable roof that's coming towards us. Again, wood windows carrying through, similar window sizes and light patterns, painted wood door entry. Next slide, please. And this is the back elevation as it exists, right at the property line. There's no windows. Next slide, please. And so we see the massing of the new. Again, this would be, it is set back a bit from that south elevation of the house. I think that's the last slide of the, oh yes, and there's no change to this elevation.
Thank you, Julie.
Yeah, thank you.
So as Julie said, there's no change on this elevation on Federal Street. And if you could go to the next slide, please, Caitlin. And here are photographs of the existing condition, which are actually very well illustrated. I'll point out on the bottom right photograph, you can see how close the house next door at 26 Federal Street is. That's Chris and Tom Tush, and they have provided a letter of support or non-opposition to Eve's proposal, as has the abutter to the right on Liberty Street, which is at 64 Liberty Street, I believe is that number. And they have also provided a letter of, it's 60 Liberty Street, excuse me, a letter of non-opposition. Next slide, please. So the board needs to consider, as you know, the criteria for the special permit for non-conformities. Here, the first criteria is that no new non-conformities are created, and there are no new non-conformities created. There is an upward extension and an extension along both of the front line and the rear line, but it actually improves it in both instances, even though it doesn't meet the setback required. It does improve it and bring it inside the framing, as Julie explained, of the existing house, and importantly, inside the property line. The next criteria is that the proposed change will not be substantially more detrimental to the neighborhood than the pre-existing non-conforming structure. Here, the proposed addition adds a mere 128 square feet to the footprint of the home. Further, the rear line is extended 8.8 feet, but not at the same intensity as I noticed before. The extension of is entirely within the property lines, whereas the existing structure lies outside the property line and conflicts with the current edges of the historic home. While it's true that there is an upward extension in the rear nonconformity, as you can see from the elevations, there are no windows on that side of the home, and we have support from the abutters as well. Further, the applicant has discussed the proposed addition with the other abutters, and they too support it. Finally, the addition is in keeping with the historic nature of the home. It does not detract from it and is clearly subservient and apart from it. It respects the design of the existing end of that home and front face of that home, and certainly doesn't detract from it and is subservient to it. Also, while not directly in the board's purview, you'll see the details of the addition are consistent with that historic structure, including the windows and siding, which is why we actually returned to the Historic Commission. It wasn't that they had or took any issue with the proposal itself. They wanted to see the details on the plan of the proposed materials. So namely the cedar shingles on the roof, the cedar siding and the exposure, and in particular, the windows. They wanted to see in more detail. It was originally proposed that the windows weren't as consistent with the existing on the structure, and now they are. So as I remind the board that the term substantially means to a great or significant extent, and when used in the context of the ordinance, the board would have to make a finding that the proposed renovations and expansion upward were substantially more detrimental to the neighborhood. Here, based on the size of the change to the addition as compared to the existing conditions, the proposed change cannot be found to be substantially more detrimental to the neighborhood. We respectfully suggest to the board, and we'd request that you approve the special permit for nonconformities for 64 Liberty Street. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Attorney Mead, and thank you, Ms. McDonald, presentation. At this point, we will close that part of the hearing and move on to public comment. Anyone that wishes to comment on this application attending the meeting, please use the raised hand icon to be recognized, and remember to unmute and clearly state your name and address.
I'm not seeing any hands at this time, Chair.
No hands at this time. I'll give it a second. 3, 2, 1. All right. No comments from the public. We will close that portion of the hearing and move on to questions from the board, starting with Mr. Delisle.
Thank you, Mr. Moore. Attorney Mead, a couple questions for you. One of my questions was answered actually by the second dot under number 2. What was the total increase of the square footage through the proposed addition, which is 128 square feet. So that's good. That's answered. do you know what the age of the structure, the part of the structure that's going to be removed is? How is that? That's not contemporaneous with the age of the historical portion of the building, is it?
Mr. Delisle, first, you give me an opportunity. I want to say it's really great to see all of your faces. I really appreciate the new format, so it's a little more personal. So, Mr. Delisle, this is a really great question. One of the reasons we had to go to the Historic Commission is because as you face the end of the structure on Liberty Street, that shed roofed addition was on there. We couldn't date it. But then there was an addition. So that part of that shed roof addition was not original to the structure, but was added, but it's unclear how much later, but it's old. Then behind it, more recently, in the last 40 years, let's say, there was an addition put on to that, where the skylights and the sliders and everything are. So it was of two ages. But the side one was a little bit older.
Okay, interesting. Okay, and so in the proposed addition, the upward extension is actually not on the Liberty Street frontage, but it's on the back of the property, the side running parallel to Liberty Street.
That's correct. If you could go to the next page, please, Caitlin. So as you can see, this is the exact same view. And Julie and Eve designed this purposefully so that it was not on the Liberty Street side and there was actually a step back. So we first have a step back to that first floor addition, which was not, that corner board was not exposed before. And so now it will be exposed. And then about 5.5 feet in, that second floor gets added on. So it is definitely not right on Liberty Street.
Okay. And I noticed that with regard to open space and lot coverage, one is going up and one is going down, or one is becoming more intensified and one is becoming less intensified. Could you sort of walk us through that?
So sure. So the lot coverage is increasing because if you go to the site plan, Caitlin, please. And I don't know if you can blow it up a little bit, but on the bottom. So lot coverage is increasing because the size of the addition is increasing by 123 square feet in the footprint. So you'll see it extends out 8.5 feet or 8.8 feet longer than the current addition. However, open space increases and becomes better because we take the building off of that back property line, and therefore that is actually exposed, and the differential actually makes the open space better. It's a weird thing about the calculation, but that's how it ends up.
Okay. All right, thank you. Those are all the questions I have at this time.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Delisle. We move on to Mr. Swanton.
Yeah. Interesting, Lisa, you comment on the our new look. It is fun for us to see each of the other members. I would like someday to see you too, but we're not quite there yet. On this page that we have up here, I couldn't help but notice that the setback on the proposed two-story addition is now, it's no longer like flush with the front of the building. It's actually set back a little bit. Is that correct? It's been moved back at least a half a foot or something?
That's correct. So both of the corner boards now, if you could go back up to that elevation again, or back down to that elevation again, Caitlin, I think it's right there. So both of the corner boards are now exposed. So it has been pushed in both from Liberty Street and from the rear property line.
Okay, yeah, I think that's a good move, particularly with something that's on the street. Could you go back to the previous slide that showed the plot plan? There's a comment on that lower picture. It says in the bottom left corner, it says install what does it say? Replace bituminous sidewalk with brick. So I don't think you have to do this as a requirement, but this is what's happening as part of this plan?
That's correct.
Okay, I just trying to understand that. You mentioned the two abutters are in support. Are those the two that are shown here, the one in the top and the one on the right?
Yes, sir. They're both of the immediate abutters have provided letters to the board.
Have we heard from, obviously we didn't hear during public comment of anybody who's against it, but have we received any letters of anybody not supporting it?
Not to my knowledge, Mr. Swanton.
I applaud you for going back to the Historic Commission, by the way, before you came here and working it out with them and getting their support. That was very positive. And although we're not supposed to comment on taste, I think this is a really nice house, and I think this is a tasteful addition. So that's just a side comment. So I have no other comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Swanton. Mr. Chagnon? Are we still muted? Did we lose him?
Chair, it looks like he may have dropped off the call at this moment.
Okay, we'll wait for him to get back in. So we'll go to Mr. Bennett.
I have no questions. My colleagues have covered the waterfront. I would simply say that there are many positives about this project. It's very thoughtfully done and, my view, quite tasteful and consistent with the historic nature of that structure. I appreciate the effort that went into that.
Thank you, Mr. Bennett. I would agree for all the reasons my colleagues have stated, and would hope that we can get Mr. Chagnon back quickly. I don't know how long we'll give him to come back. It sounds like we're all in support of this. So with the members that are still live, we could move on this. But I would like to hear from him if possible. So give it a minute or two. Caitlin, has there been any luck?
No, I'm not seeing him at this time.
No, Attorney Mead, given the fact that we still have 4 members, minimal board, and you've heard our comments, would you feel comfortable going forward? Would you rather hate to use that term, rather try to give a few minutes to get Mr. Chagnon back in?
No, sir, I'd be fine with the board going forward.
Okay. All right, so I'm going to close deliberations right now because we lost communication with Mr. Chagnon, and if he comes back in shortly, we'll reopen and have him speak. But I believe I'm comfortable going forward in looking for a motion unless the board has a problem with this.
I'll make a motion. This is Ken Swanton to approve the special permit for non-conformities for 64 Liberty Street, file 2021-52.
Greg Bennett here. I'll second that motion.
Right, we have a motion to approve made by Mr. Swanton, seconded by Mr. Bennett. Still no luck with our colleague coming on. We're going to move forward with this and proceed with the vote. Mr. Swanton.
Yes.
Oh, Mr. Delisle went out of turn. Mr. Delisle. He's frozen too. Mr. Bennett.
Yes.
We lost Mr. Delisle too. I even try to expedite the process and
I'm sorry.
we're back. Mr. Delisle, how do you vote?
Oh, no, I think I'm here.
I can barely hear you. It's cutting in and out. Could you try again to get through? Because it's breaking up. I can barely hear you. And your screen is frozen if you can hear me.
Maybe he could chat. Is there a chat mechanism or
Yeah.
a telephone call number?
Just to be clear, there is a call-in phone number folks can use on the website, and that might be preferable. Panelists also have that in their emails. And not using video is one way to help with the connections if there's anything like that going on.
But we look good.
Stephen, you look live. Can you hear us?
Back.
Okay, great. And how vote you?
Yes.
All right. So we have 4 in the affirmative. And the application is approved. And we'll move on and hopefully get our colleague back.
Thank you. Have a great night.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We now move on to the final application of the evening, and that's Joseph O'Donnell and Kelly Van Leer O'Donnell, the Carolisa Mead. It's 143 Crow Lane, application 2021-55, special permit for nonconformities to construct an addition on a nonconforming single-family structure greater than 500 feet. And might we hear from the applicant?
Mr. Chair, Lisa Mead, Mead, Tellerman, Costa, 30 Green Street, on behalf of Joseph O'Donnell and Kelly Van Leer O'Donnell of 143 Crow Lane. And if you could just confirm that you have at least 4 members.
Let's make sure we do. Mr. Bennett is still here.
Yes, I am.
Mr. Swanton's still here. Mr. Delisle is still here. Is that correct?
I'm here, yes.
Excellent.
Excellent.
Okay, thank you. If you could go to the first slide, please. Joe and Kelly have a single-story ranch on Crow Lane. I know this board has heard at least 1, if not 2, applications on Crow Lane in the last 6 months. They would like to construct an addition to the western side and rear of the existing single-family home. Importantly, they are doing so and not exacerbating any of the existing nonconformities or creating any new nonconformities. The structure was constructed in 1966 when the southern portion of Crow Lane off of Turkey Hill was laid out. I guess I don't have to say that very much longer because we only now have 1 Crow Lane. Many of you know we used to have 2 Crow Lanes. Now one of them is called Colby Farm Road. The property has an existing nonconformity for lot size, frontage, and front yard setback, and one of the side yard setbacks. It's in the R1 district now, which requires a minimum lot area of 20,000 square feet where the lot has 16.5, 125 feet of frontage where the lot has 100 feet of frontage, front yard setback of 30 feet where the front yard setback is measured at 27.1, and a 20-foot side yard setback where the east side setback is 11.2. As you face the property, that's on the left. Joe and Kelly, with the help of their architect, Lane Jones, who is not able to be with us this evening, proposes to construct an addition on the western and rear side of the property that includes a 2-car garage and additional rooms. The proposed addition takes advantage, as you'll see in a moment, of the topographical change on this lot. The proposed addition itself will have a front yard setback of 34. If you could go to the next slide, please. And a rear yard, side yard setback of 22 feet on the western side, which is where the house is being extended, which is greater than the 20 feet. The eastern side will not change, and the rear will still have a 45-foot setback where 30 feet is required. The height is a mean height of 22 feet where 30 feet is required. Additionally, the lot coverage will be increased from 7.01 to 16.1, which is still under the maximum of 20. And the open space will decrease from 83.1 to 73.9, which is still much greater than the minimum 50%. If you could go to the next slide, please. So here is a plot plan of the existing structure on Crow Lane. You see the driveway, and we have a small ranch style home at the front. The existing home is 1,164 square feet. Next slide, please. If you could blow this up a little bit, Caitlin, I actually think this is a really good, it's tougher to see in these one-dimensional drawings I'm going to show you in a minute. But this is actually really good visual from the architect of how this house is laid out on the lot. So you'll see the existing structure at the front, and you can see the addition all goes back to the rear and a little bit to the west. That's the garage. And the house itself, when I show you the photographs, I mean, the lot, the topography drops off from the front right to the back left corner. And so therefore, Lane takes advantage of some of that topography when he does this addition so that it doesn't overwhelm the ranch style house in the front. But as you can see on this, it still continues to meet all of the setback requirements. Next slide, please. So here's the here are the line drawings and what Lane has done on this to show you what the existing and the proposed is. And you'll see that it's hard to see this in 3 dimensions. That's why I thought that the plot plan was really important. On the left-hand side of the top photograph, top drawing, that's the existing structure. You can see he has existing outlined there. And on the right is the proposed, but as you know, given what I showed you just a minute ago, that's actually set back. You can't see that on these flat drawings, but it actually goes to the rear of the property, but that's the proposed. On the north side elevation, you can see it a little better. And you can see how it drops back, and you can see the existing and the proposed. Next slide, please. And here we have the east elevation. Again, you can see the topographical change a little bit on this. This is if you were in front of the house, this is the left side. The east elevation is the left side. And then the south elevation, you can see on the other side of the house, the other drawing in the back, you can see existing and proposed. That's if you were in the rear of the property. Next slide, please. Again, this is a good way to see it. So the existing structure is in the light lines and on the left-hand side of this drawing. The heavy dark lines are the proposed addition. You can see how it is all stepped back to the rear of the house and at the side of the house. And the next slide, please. Again, I think on this drawing, you can see on the left-hand side how this addition gets put on the property without overwhelming the front part of the property. Next slide, please. So just to give you an idea, this is the home. This is on Crow Lane, and you'll see that driveway stays the same and goes to service the back where the addition is going to be placed on the house. Next slide, please. Again, you can see the topography on this slide. I think this is an important slide, and you'll understand better how the addition doesn't overwhelm the existing structure. Next slide, please. Again, this is from past the house on the left. Nothing's happening on the front part of this of this side of the house, which is where the current nonconformity is. Next slide, please. And these are some pictures of other houses in the neighborhood. So here's another house on Crow Lane that is also a ranch. Next slide, please. But then you can see how people have started to add on to their homes on Crow Lane. So we have an addition of a garage. Next slide, please. And here we have a split that's been added to on Crow Lane. Next slide, please. And here's another house on Crow Lane that's got an additional garage added on to the original ranch. Next slide, please. And here's the house, the Virginia Lane. In a little bit, we're going to talk about the neighborhood generally, but Virginia Lane ends at Crow Lane. And here's a house on this end of the original section of Virginia Lane. Next slide, please. And Storybook Drive also ends in Crow Lane. So there's a sample of a home on Storybook Drive. Next slide, please. And similarly, another home on Storybook Drive. So next slide, please. So the board must decide whether or not there's 2 criteria, whether or not there's any new nonconformities. And in this instance, there are no new nonconformities created and none are exacerbated. The next condition, of course, or criteria is whether or not the proposed change will be substantially more detrimental to the neighborhood than the pre-existing non-conforming structure. Here, by constructing the addition to the rear and westerly side of the property in a way it's entirely conforming with the dimensional requirements, the proposed addition that the owners and Lane have done is mindful to minimize any impact on the surrounding neighborhood by not creating any new nonconformities or extending any existing nonconformities. Lane has been able to utilize the topography of the lot in the middle and western portions and take advantage of how the eastern side drops off. The proposed addition is built partially into the ground on the western side, helping to minimize the height disparities between the existing house and the proposed addition, while allowing the applicants to add space in a way that does not radically change the appearance of the structure from the street. A portion of the garage will be slightly taller than the existing house, but it will be constructed toward the rear and not directly up against the existing structure. Also, it bears to mention that the use is remaining a single family, of course, the least intense use possible in this primarily single family residential district. As I noted earlier, other houses on Crow Lane, Goldsmith Drive, Bartlett Drive, Knights Lane, Virginia Lane, Storybrooke show many different examples of both larger single family homes than what is being proposed. This proposal will not either be the largest nor the smallest in the neighborhood. And this neighborhood is evolving in many different ways, as this board has noted in the past. Next slide, please. So what I wanted to just show you, so obviously the house highlighted in the middle is this property, and you see Virginia Lane, Knights Lane, and Storybook all coming into it. Goldsmith is to the rear. What's important to note on this property, and I will say that you've received 12 letters of support for Joe and Kelly on this. That includes the abutters to the direct rear of Goldsmith Drive, all three abutters, two widths on either side of them on Crow Lane, and abutters across the street on both sides of Virginia Lane and Storybook Drive, so that you have received 12 letters of support from just about all of the surrounding neighbors you could possibly find. With that, I request the board to grant this special permit for nonconformities and allow Joe and Kelly to proceed with Lane in improving their home. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Attorney Mead. We'll now turn to public comment. If there's anyone that would like to comment on this application that is on the call right now, still, use the raise hand icon and to be recognized, and we'll move forward.
Not seeing any hands at this time, Chair.
I'm not surprised. So at this point, we will close public comment and move on to questions from the board, starting with Mr. Delisle.
I just have one question. Just Attorney Mead, if you could just speak to the materials that'll be used on the exterior of the building once it is in process as proposed.
So I have to tell you, Mr. Delisle, I don't know specifically all of the materials, and Lane was unavailable this evening. I would say that, he's got some barn board that he has shown on the plans that you can see. And you can see that the windows are 4/1s and, divided light windows. So I can't speak to the exact materials. I apologize for that.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that. I have no further questions.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Delisle. Mr. Swan.
Yeah, I think your plot plan showing all the setbacks was a very useful way to show that. I also liked your line drawings like this one here. And I thought your layout of the abutters showing all the letters of support and where they were in the neighborhood was very compelling. Actually, I have no questions.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Swanton. Mr. Chagnon, we welcome you back.
Thank you.
Glad to see you're safe and sound. That's okay.
I was on the phone, by the way, so maybe next time if one of us drops out, look over in the attendees list and see if there's a strange phone number hanging out there.
My apologies.
Nope, that's all right. Nope. With that said, I don't really have any questions, but I will say a great presentation, a very unique design to fit in this lot, and I think it's very tasteful. But I've got no questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Tragnon. Mr. Bennett?
I have a question. What is the total square footage of the addition? If you know,
Sure.
including the garage?
Sure. The total square footage addition is 1,428 square feet.
The current home is 1,000 or so, is that what you said?
1,164.
And I'm just trying to, if you can help me view that size home in the context of the neighborhood there.
So I think probably all but the first slide that we showed, I suspect, although I don't have the exact calculations of all of the surrounding homes, but if you look at, if you could pick up the contextual slides, Caitlin or Andy, there we go. So obviously the first ranch that I showed you is almost exactly like the ranch, Joe and Kelly's ranch. So that's got to be about 1,100 square feet. I wouldn't take it more. But then you start to see that if you go to the next slide, so obviously that's got more than 2,500 square feet in it. Next
Where's
slide.
that one
please.
located? I'm sorry, Attorney. Mead.
Oh, go back one. It's at Crow Lane also.
Okay. What?
Next slide, please. Crow Lane's not a huge street. Here's also Crow Lane. There's I don't know if you can see that. I think there's a little addition on the back and a mudroom here. So I suspect that this is greater than 11, but probably not 25. Next slide, please. Again, this is Virginia Lane. So this is when I say the first part of Virginia Lane, so how this neighborhood was developed, you have Crow Lane, and then Virginia Lane and Storybook were built off of Crow Lane as a subdivision, but it was a much larger subdivision which started and then stopped. The developer at the time never finished it. And so the original part of Virginia Lane, which is this, which abuts closest to Crow Lane, had smaller houses than the ones at the other end of Crow Lane, which are closer to Story Avenue. So this house obviously is greater than 1,100, but probably a little less than 25 or just about, depending on how big the back is. And it's got room over the garage as well. Next slide, please. This is Storybook. Again, this is the development right next to, this is the older end of Storybook. That house has probably got about 2,500 square feet in it. Next slide, please. And this also Storybook. Again, I suspect that this has got, 2,000 to 2,500 square feet.
Right. Thank you. One other, show me, if you don't mind, would you just show me the picture that depicts the topography as it slopes down from the back of the existing building? And could you comment on what's the level of the slope there?
So if you could go to the first photograph, I think, Caitlin or Andy, I never know who's operating so do you see that this is the house and you can see so you have, if you go, maybe the next slide shows it a little bit better. There we go. Yeah. So you see the drop in the elevation, you can see the exposed foundation. So if you're on the right-hand side of the house, there's really very little exposed foundation. You go to the left and there's almost a full story of exposed foundation. So this is built to the back. And so the larger part of the addition that's more like a two-story part is behind that, taking advantage of that slope.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure I had my visuals correct. I must say the architect was rather creative in using that topography and minimizing the scale of this addition. Thanks for the help.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bennett. I think my colleagues have covered. I have no further questions. So we'll close questions from the board and move on to deliberations. And as such, I won't abbreviate this like I did last time in the curveball phase of the meeting, but we should couch our deliberations around the necessary findings for special permit for nonconformities, as was discussed by the applicant. And we'll start with Mr. Delisle.
Thank you, Mr. Moore. in looking at the standard for special permit for non-conformities, there's no new non-conformity here, and what's proposed, in my opinion, is not substantially more detrimental to the neighborhood. Rather, it takes a very simple house and makes it very interesting. And I think that that Lane Jones's drawings here sort of channel some aspect of Royal Barry Wills, and it looks really, really nice the way that he drew it out. So I can support this project.
Thank you, Mr. Delisle. Mr. Swanton?
Yeah, I think it's already been pointed out that there are no new nonconformities. I mean, this picture it's in front of us right now, showing that two-story structure over there. I mean, the fact this was kept at one story and it's kind of in the back. Really, I understand what Mr. Bennett was getting at with the massing, but to me, I think the architect, as he pointed out, has done a good job of trying to fight that with their approach, taking advantage of the topology. So I too can support this proposal.
Thank you, Mr. Swanton. Mr. Chagnon?
Thank you, Mr. Moore. Again, I'll reiterate a great presentation, nice design. I must admit, when I first looked at the drawings, when we received them, I thought massing was going to be a problem, but in looking at some of the homes that have been modified in the area, as Attorney Mead said, it certainly won't be the largest home in the area, and it'll no longer be one of the smallest. With that said, I can support it, and I think it's a wonderful design and a great improvement. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chagnon. And Mr. Bennett?
I will concur in those observations. This is kind of an interesting neighborhood, isn't it? I mean, it has a kind of a Heinz variety of approaches, but this approach clearly is very well done, and I'm particularly impressed by the fact that there are 12 abutters here who, or not 12 abutters, but 12 neighbors who support this project. I think the scaling and massing did catch my eye, but at the end of the day, I think there's no question that this is an improvement to that home and to the neighborhood, and is consistent with the findings we have to make here. So I would approve this application for non-conformities as well.
Excellent. Thank you, Mr. Bennett. And for all of the reasons my colleagues mentioned, I would agree that the one word that came to mind with the neighborhood was an eclectic grouping of homes, old and new. And I applaud the creativity here in really expanding the size of this house without, with a real thoughtful way to not make the massing an issue in any way, shape, or form here. So I too can support this. With that, I close deliberations, and we will look for a motion.
This is Bud Shagnon. I'll make a motion to approve docket 2021-55, a special permit for non-conformities for 143 Crow Lane.
Second, Ken Swanton.
All right, motion made and seconded to approve. Made by Mr. Chagnon, seconded by Mr. Swanton, and we'll go to a vote. Mr. Delisle?
Yes.
Mr. Swanton?
Yes.
Mr. Chagnon?
Yes.
Mr. Bennett?
Yes.
I am also a yes, all in the affirmative. The application is approved.
Thank you very much, gentlemen. It was good to see you this evening.
Thank you. Good to be seen. And with that, we have exhausted the agenda of public hearings for this evening. And we will now close that portion and move on to our business meeting, which will start with approval of the minutes from the 10-12 meeting. Does anyone have any additions, notations, comments before we proceed to a vote on the minutes?
None here.
Hearing, I just hear an interruption. Does someone have a comment? No.
I move we approve the minutes, Ken Swanton.
There we go.
Second that.
We have a motion to approve the minutes made by Mr. Swanton, seconded by Mr. Delisle. We'll go to a vote. Mr. Delisle?
Yes.
Mr. Swanton?
Yes.
Mr. Chagnon,
Yes.
Mr. Bennett.
Yes.
I'm also a yes. All in the affirmative, the minutes are approved from the 10-12 meeting. Thank you, gentlemen. There's one additional thing that I believe we should discuss this evening. That's not listed in the agenda, but there was an email from Andy sent out that KP Law would like to do a little 40B primer or primer. I don't know if that's the right way to pronounce it. On the 9th of November. But as we learned earlier today, the docket on the 9th is pretty full. So having KP Law hit us up at the end of public hearings might cause for a really late meeting. So we have two options. We can stay late, maybe do it earlier, or come up with plan C. So we'll put that up for a little discussion here. Andy, do you have anything to add to?
No, as Chair Moore mentioned very eloquently, it's sort of that balancing act, and we wanted to get an overview for you as soon as possible of the process, should you be seeing a 40B in the near future, just to make sure you're comfortable with the process. And if you have any questions, we can answer them or, get further guidance for you. But we weren't sure, again, if you feel like, you prefer to push it out, or my thinking was just perhaps if the board could meet at 6 o'clock for something like that, that we could take care of that prior to your regular meeting so as not to impact your ability to complete things that night. But kind of defer to you as a board how urgently you want to do it and whether or not you're comfortable, going early that night if possible.
Yeah, so I guess my question, thank you, Andy, by the way, my question would be, is the preference to do it before? Is everyone going to be available before that meeting to do that versus doing it later? Or is there another date just for a specific meeting? Can that be done? Or does it have to be done during a public hearing, a scheduled public hearing night?
It could be done as a special meeting, and we can push it out. The balancing act, of course, is I'm trying to make sure you're up to speed should there be something that comes in. I think we could perhaps push that to the next meeting. I guess I don't know, Caitlin, what you think the agenda looks like for that next meeting, but what we were trying to do is make sure you have an overview early as possible, so that in addition to the overview, the attorney who's providing the overview is working with me to provide an update for your 40B regulations, which is a subsection of the board's local rules and regs. Right. So in order to update those, we wanted to kind of initiate that conversation such that I could also return back with him in short order to ask you to consider adopting some updates to the regulations.
Okay.
Andy,
sure.
what's your sense of the length of this presentation and update?
I think it would take about a half hour at most, to go over things, and it's then after that it's just more of questions for you, I guess. But we understood that the agenda already has some things on it. We just weren't sure whether you wanted to tack that on the end, and folks might feel a little bit, like a lot's been done, but by the time we reach that point in the night, not sure.
Yeah, this is Bud Shagnon. I guess my preference would be to do the 6 o'clock option rather than a separate night, and completely separate night. I don't know how everyone else feels.
Is everyone else got does anyone else have a problem with a 6 if they know now that we want to do that at 6?
I think that would work for me.
Okay.
Yeah, that would work for me. Is something imminent? Is there a reason to do this soon?
Well, I was just saying a second ago, not being sure when, if or when a 40B filing would be made, we want to make sure the board is up to date as soon as possible. And then in addition to that, as I said a moment ago, part of that is to have a discussion so that we can circle back with you in short order to ask you to, at a subsequent meeting, consider updating your regulations therefore. So that's the reason for doing that, because those things take time to, there's weeks in between meetings, and there's time that takes to revise documents and speak with the attorney. We're just trying to map those things out to make sure that prior to anything coming in, you are well up to speed, both in terms of your regulations and your overview. So that, without knowing the definitive date of an application coming in, I can't say anything more than that.
Say, Andy, would this presentation from our city solicitor cover whether or not this city has a housing production plan that shields us from an unfriendly 40B? That's really a legal question.
I No, I don't think that's really the purpose of this meeting, and it probably isn't the right setting to have that discussion in. But it's more to discuss how the process works from the Zoning Board of Appeals perspective. We can certainly, and I think he will be covering some of the basics of how that works. We can sort of elaborate on that, but the purpose is to make sure you're familiar with how the process works, because there are already folks underway, and we can provide sort of a recap for you. But folks are already underway, and Caitlin and myself specifically, trying to make sure that we're taking credit for any units that we have, in terms of the so-called safe harbor status, and getting full credit for those with Department of Housing and Community Development. But none of that is going to change as a result of the board's discussion now. Our goal is mainly to make sure that the board feels comfortable with the process that it might be going through if a 40B is filed, because it is a little bit different than a special permit process or a variance process you typically deal with. And it's been a while since the board's had an application like that.
Yeah, I mean, I fully support having this meeting. I'm disappointed we can't talk about whether we're shielded, but I guess this is a necessary first step. I was up to my eyeballs in my last municipality as chairman of the Board of Selectmen fighting off 40Bs, and to me, it's I'm just shocked we don't know whether or not we have a housing production plan that gives us protection right now as we speak from a 40B, and so we're worried about them. I'm just stunned. But having said that, I don't want to debate it tonight. I'll just
Ken, just to answer your question and to make it clear, we do actually know the answer to that question. We're not there right now. We have the ability to get there in the near term by approving the planning board, approving a project that is before them right now on Route 1. We do know the math associated with our present position and how to get ourselves to a better negotiating position should that, in terms of safe harbor. It's just it's not the best thing to sort of go through all those, details, there's a whole lot of strategy associated with how the numbers are counted, and it's a very complicated system essentially, but we are efforting, we both know the status, and we're efforting to try to make sure the city is in the best position regardless of what comes before the board. But again, this is about making sure the board is up to speed on the regulations.
Okay, I'm not trying to belabor this. I fully support having this, as Bud suggested, as an early topic at our next meeting.
Steven, you good with that?
I support that too. Yeah, that sounds good.
Okay. Yeah, let's do it. Let's plan to do it at 6 p.m. on the evening of our meeting on November 9th then.
I'm sorry, just to confirm, 6 p.m. exactly, or is that?
I believe 6 p.m.
Okay, great. No, that's wonderful. Thank you.
All righty, that'd be great. And I mean, is there would you feel comfortable with answering this question? Is it more likely or not that we will face a 40B by the end of the year?
That much I cannot answer. The mayor and I did have a meeting with New England Development today. We talked to them about the Waterfront West area and the recent discussion or suggestion that they'd be working with Avalon on a 230 unit project there under the 40B process. We had explained to them that we think that there's some folks here in the city who would like to discuss Waterfront West further and the zoning that they feel like does not work for them, but the city feels is necessary to some degree to protect the compatibility of that area as it's built out with the downtown. So we made it clear that we'd like to discuss those things further. There was some desire to do that from some others, both the planning board and city council end. So hopefully we'll be able to make some progress in those discussions. And I wouldn't imagine if those are underway that you're going to see something in next month, but there certainly is the possibility of that because they've expressed some concern that the local zoning doesn't work for them. So again, I can't predict the exact timing of someone coming with an application on the private side, but they have obviously indicated that they'd like to work with Avalon, who is a company that is well prepared for that type of application. So I guess it's a little bit of the ball is in their court right now.
Okay, fair enough. So in the meantime, we'll prepare and we'll be ready for a 6 o'clock meeting on the 9th to kind of refresh. Mr. Swanton might want to lead the charge on refresh some of our memory or bring us up to speed, we'll say, and then it'll bring back nightmares that Mr. Swanton's going to have to relive. But that's what we'll do on the 9th. And with that, Unless anyone has anything else they want to discuss. We can call it a day if there's a motion.
I move that we adjourn before 9 o'clock. Hey, hey.
Wow. When you skip a few steps and it makes it fast, doesn't it? All right. We have a motion to adjourn, seconded by Mr. Delisle, I'll say, and all in favor, say aye. Aye. Anyone objecting? Thank God. And with that, the meeting is closed.
Great.
Good night, everyone.
Thank you.
Everybody. Thanks,
All right.
Caitlin.
Pleasant evening.
Good night.
Thanks, Gretchen.